Welcome to the breakout session on Generation Z. I'm so glad you've joined me for this session. And it tells me something about you, that you're not afraid to dive into a new generation of people with a whole different language. They use words like lit, flex, swole, and drippin, and so many more other things, phrases, and things that they talk about that feel a little foreign to some of us. But in pregnancy ministry, our goal is to reach our young women and young men, right? To connect with them. And so we have to know how they're talking, how they're thinking, what's interesting to them, so that we can connect with them and make a difference in their life. One of the greatest ways we can do that is to know who they are, not who we want them to be, or we don't want them to be like we are. We want to know who they are and meet them right where they are. So we're going to dive into the world of Generation Z for the next few minutes. I'm going to be using a PowerPoint to show you some interesting things about this group of young adults and teenagers. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you so you can follow along on the PowerPoint. Okay, we're going to cover three major points in these next few moments together. The world of Generation Z, who is Generation Z, and then how do we reach them? So let's start with the world of Generation Z. These people are being raised in the most fast-paced, confusing generation in history. And we know that because of technology. Yes, history is full of drama and lots of upheaval and lots of crazy times, but it did not have the technology that we have today, which has changed our world and certainly changed the world of Generation Z in ways that it's very hard for those of us older to sometimes connect with, but we want to, so we're going to try. I want to start with a brief look at what has happened on our globe that has changed the whole dynamic of our world. Historians and culturists have identified 4 dramatic changes in recent years that have impacted our Gen Z people. So let's look at their world that they are growing up in. The globalization of Christianity has happened. Christianity used to be thought of as a kind of a Western or European or American religion, worldview, but that is sliding into the Southern Hemisphere. Christianity is moving into Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Evangelism is taking off there, so much more so than America and in Europe. In fact, according to Philip Jenkins, by the year 2050, only 1 Christian out of 5 will be a non-Latino white person. And the gravity of the Christian world will have shifted firmly to the Southern Hemisphere. So our world, our country, is not as Christian for our kids and for these young adults as we grew up with it being. That's a completely different thing for them, that Christianity is really more of a Southern Hemisphere religion. Secondly, they've seen the rise of Islam. Some of the spread of Islam across the globe has been peaceful, but some has been pretty chaotic and damaging. The thing that they know about it is 9/11, which was a clash of cultures. Obviously, it was a huge traumatic event for our country, and some of them were born but very young, some of them that even happened before they were born. But they know about it. It's recent enough history that they know about 9/11, and that to them is Islam. And they've heard about Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They watched videos of ISIS beheading people. They saw them taking over with this caliphate. So they've watched this religion moving around the world in ways that it wasn't moving around the world 20 and 30 years ago. Number 3, a radical redefinition of marriage and family. So no longer is a marriage a male husband, a female wife, and usually children. Although a couple is a family, but usually couples have children. That was the traditional family, but that is not the definition of family anymore. The new definition is male with male, female with female, multiple partners, polygamy, or polyamory unions, where just as many people as you want having sex together, living together like a family. And that has changed very much what Generation Z thinks about a family. It really can be anything you want it to be. James Emery White, who wrote Meet Generation Z, says this: "It's a new day in which the very idea of family is being recast in light of personal desire." So it's whoever you want to live with, whoever you want to be intimate with, that's the family. Number 4, in the world of Gen Z, is the doctrine of humanity has changed. The very idea of what it means to be a human being is now being called into question with things like stem cell research, cloning, transsexualism, which is the consistently strong desire to change your anatomical gender, changing morals, technology. All these things have enabled scientists to wonder what really is a human, what constitutes a human. Can we change that? Can we manipulate it? So if you look at these 4 things, these are huge shifts in our world that most of us did not grow up with, but our young adults and teens certainly are growing up with. And what that has led to in America is the rise of the nuns. And you may have heard that term before, the nuns. These are people who have no religious affiliation. If you ask them what religion they are or what faith system they adhere to, they would say nothing. They don't really believe in anything. And these numbers of nuns are rising faster than any other group, as the number of professing Christians is shrinking. Let's look at some numbers. So in the 1930s and 40s in America, only 5% of our country would say that they were nothing, no religion. It bumped up a little bit over 40 or 50 years, about 3 percentage points to 8.1% 1990. But then look at the jump in 18 years, from 1990 to 2008 to 15%. And then again, 4 years later, we went up to 20%, 1 of every 5 Americans and 1 of 330 identifying as none. And then look at that, 3 more years, we're up to 23%, nearly 1 of 4 American adults no longer has any religious affiliation. So James Emery White says the rise of the nuns and the fall of Christians is widespread, crossing race, gender, educational, and geographic barriers. And that is even here what we might call the Bible Belt. These numbers are the same. So we don't want to say that the Christian sky is falling. It's not falling yet, if it ever will. It's on the rise worldwide. Christianity is spreading, as we talked about, just into other parts of the world. It's not really spreading or doing much here in America as far as growth goes. So what that has led to is what we call the squishy center, a whole group of squishies. And there are 3 processes we want to look at before we unpack the squishies a little bit. And that is secularization, privatization, and pluralization. So let's start with secularization. This process has taken its toll on Christianity in America. Sectors of society and culture have moved out from under the domination of religious institutions and religious symbol. So take Christmas, for example. Used to be nativity sets were everywhere. They were in public buildings, the government buildings, public schools, in the marketplace, certainly churches and homes. Well, nativity scenes are pretty hard to find anymore. Sometimes you'll see them on somebody's lawn and in our churches, but they are not very public anymore. They've been removed from government places and public places. That's just one example of how the church is losing its influence in shaping thought, in shaping life in our country. We are no longer the dominant worldview in America, as we've been marginalized. So the result for our Gen Zs is that there is less supportive context for faith. So faith is something that is out there somewhere, but it's not here in the visible sphere of everyday life. So our country is more secular. The second process is privatization. James Emery White says, a chasm is created between the public and the private spheres of life, and spiritual things are increasingly placed within the private arena. So the result being all things related to faith are becoming private. So that's between you and your God. Whatever you want to do in the privacy of your own home, however you want to worship, that's up to you. And it's not talked about at work anymore. It's not talked about in our school systems. It is not part of the public discourse. Religion has become private. And thirdly, pluralization. So this is where so many religions now have risen up to the surface and are discussed, and all are considered equally valid, equally true. We are to honor all of them the same, so that any religion you want is just fine. Peter Berger, who is a sociologist and theologian, described traditional religion as a sacred canopy. So if you look at this picture, it kind of shows us, just gives us a visual, that our country used to live under a religious canopy of sorts, where it was understood that Christianity was the basic religion in our country. Our laws had been based on it and were biblical. Even if people didn't agree with it, or certainly were not Christians themselves, it was still the basic understanding of our country. It covered all of us, in a sense. But that canopy is gone. The religious canopy is gone. The idea that God is considered in life and thought is gone. And this is now more the way we live. We have our own little separate dwellings, and we have our own thoughts and our own belief systems, and we all are doing what we want to do as individuals. And the collective belief is now gone. This picture might even describe it better, where we're all kind of living in little pods, not relating to our neighbors, not having deep relationships. There's no foundational thought that we all agree on. This is really more how we're living. So the result of pluralization is really the most devastating of the three, because your truth now is what reigns. Your truth or my truth, or you do you and I do me, and we don't have to like it or agree with each other, and it's all good. Everybody can do whatever they want. That's what's happening in America. So these three processes, secularization, privatization, and pluralization, have had a strong impact on the squishy center. So let's start talking about the squishies for a minute. These numbers obviously are rounded to make them easier to work with, but let's say about 25% of Americans now are completely secular. They claim no religion. These are the nones. No belief system that they can identify. About 25% would say that they're truly committed Christians. They're going to church. They're trying to walk in the way that Jesus would have them walk. They would say they're committed. But this leaves us 50% of our population as squishies, the squishy center. The squishies tend to move wherever the pressure is. So if the culture is molding and shaping and pressuring them towards secularization, that's where they're going to drift. And that's what's happening. It used to be the squishy center would drift toward church, toward Christianity. But now the squishies are drifting away, and it is dramatically changing our culture. Let me give you an example of how we are now catering to the squishies and to the secular. So do you all remember Downton Abbey? Beautiful television show, really just beautifully done. But did you notice in all 6 seasons, there was not one mention of their faith, of going to church, or of prayer? And back then, an aristocratic family would have done all 3 of those things. They would have gone to church together as a family. There would have been prayer at every meal. But what Downton Abbey did was they decided to change it up. The show's executive producers instructed those making the show to leave prayer out for fear of alienating an increasingly secular public. So at meal times, if you were to go back and watch that show, you would notice now they never started a meal with coming in and sitting down to the table, because that's when prayer would take place. All the meal scenes were shot after the meal had begun, intentionally to leave out the question of prayer. So why is this important? What difference does that make? Well, the squishies used to form a bridge, a big solid bridge between the secular people and the Christian people. But that bridge is disappearing as more and more of them are moving to the secular side of things. So Ed Stetzer, who is the executive director of the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College, among other things, he's a culturalist, he's a church planter, all kinds of things. Ed says in the past, those of nominal faith were a bridge between the Christian community and the irreligious community. As the cultural cost of being a Christian increases, people who were once Christian in name only likely have started to identify as nuns, disintegrating the ideological bridge between unbelievers and believers. So the conclusion from the world of Generation Z is that there is no longer a bridge connecting us to them to woo them on over. We have to build a new bridge to reach them. How are we going to do that? You and I are in ministry. We are compelled to do that, build a bridge, bring people in and bring them to Christ as he leads us to do that. So let's see who Generation Z is before we talk about how to reach them. So they are under 25 years old, and that is 25.9% of our population. They are now the biggest group of people in our country. The millennials are at 24.5, Gen X that are a little bit older than millennials are 15.4, the baby boomers, 23.6. So our Gen Z now, biggest group in our country, and look at that, they account for 40% of all consumers, which tells us that advertising is going to be shifting more and more to the younger and younger as they are spending money. And they're going to start making products more for that age group than the others because they're the ones spending money. James White says, Generation Z will not simply influence American culture as any generation would, but they will constitute American culture. They are now driving our culture. And just to give you a quick snapshot, to kind of bring it into some clarity here, most of them don't remember 9/11. They weren't old enough or weren't born yet to remember 9/11, which made a huge impact on many of us. They don't know who Monica Lewinsky is. Google has always existed. They take it for granted. Cell phones and Wi-Fi are an entitlement. Every kid thinks they should have both. They've grown up with these supercomputers in their pockets so that music, information, games, video games, shopping, they can buy what they want online, food apps, they can order food delivered to their door, texting, taking selfies, and sending pictures. These are all things that many of us did not grow up doing all the time and having it at our fingertips all the time. This is a very different generation driven by technology and information. So let's look at their defining characteristics. The first one, Generation Z is recession marked. This is the biggest defining event in their lifetimes from 2007 and 2008, when the housing market crashed and stocks crashed. And that whole socioeconomic environment was characterized by chaos, uncertainty, volatility, and complexity. So we can see why this group of people would be genuinely worried about our world and their future. The #1 defining movie of their generation is The Hunger Games, which was about teenagers alone facing a very bleak future and having to hunt each other down and kill each other in order to survive. That's the message that Gen Z has been getting. When Americans have been polled recently, they split about 49 to 49 on whether America's best days are behind us or ahead of us. So just imagine if you're a 20-year-old and you're hearing people say, well, our best days are over. How are they supposed to feel about that? The country they are going to be working in or raising families in is sliding into something bad. They don't want that. That's very concerning to them. They have seen violence that we never saw because they can watch it on their phones. The Paris terror attacks at Charlie Hebdo, the school shootings we've had, Sandy Hook, Parkland, and of course the ISIS beheadings I mentioned earlier. All of these have been available on their phones to watch and to hear about all the time. Is it any wonder Generation Z struggles with stress, anxiety, fear, culturally, financially, emotionally? Nothing feels safe. Nothing feels safe. So there's a tendency to withdraw from it all and create safe zones where nothing hurts, nothing is threatening. But another thing that we're seeing in Gen Z is that they're developing a strong sense of independence. They're kind of pulling away from all this scary stuff, and they're becoming very individualistic, and some of them moving toward entrepreneurship, because what they're deciding as they're moving into their 20s is that they're gonna have to fix this. They have inherited a mess and they have to fix it. MTV recently did a survey and asked them as a group, we've called them Generation Z, but what would they call themselves? And they call themselves the founders, as in needing to found a new world. So that's a lot resting on their shoulders. The second defining characteristic for them is that they're Wi-Fi enabled. They're the internet in its pocket generation. The speed that this revolution in technology has taken place kind of makes it hard for older generations to realize how radically different they are. They just are because of technology. I want to show you some things. And it would be fun if we were in a group where I could have you raise your hands and we could share our answers together, but I'll just give you a second to look at these pictures to see if you know who they are. So here's the first one. Gen Z's TV icon. This is Noah Centineo. He has TV shows on Disney and Netflix. He is one of their top favorite actors. Let's look at music. This is Billie Eilish. She's a girl. She has a very dark persona and a very dark outlook. She was just on one of the recent political conventions talking about how dark our world is and expressing just a lot of despair over that. But she is one of our top singers. Here's the male top singer of today, Post Malone. If you listen to his music, he's extremely profane and would be very offensive to most people, but our young 20s and teens love him. The top app and social media platform is TikTok. Do you know who the top YouTube star is right now? He's a sensation around the world. This young man is PewDiePie. And he has over 106 million subscribers. He's posted over 4,000 videos and they get watched millions and millions of times. See, most people don't even know who he is in our age group, or in their, even people around 30 and up don't even know who he is. He's a huge sensation with Generation Z. Let's look first at the fashion. influence. So this is Kylie Jenner. This was the most modest picture I could find of her. I didn't want to offend you. So this is Kylie Jenner telling young women, teenage girls, how to dress, what to look like. But even more interesting here is our beauty influencer. Anyone know who he is? That's a he, yes. His name is James Charles. He has 21 million subscribers on YouTube and a huge following on Instagram. And he is telling teenage boys and young men that this is what they want to look like. The feminization of our young men. Very popular today. The trending fashion statement is Adidas. The 3 stripes are back. And of course, the trending gadget is the iPhone. The iPhone has changed this generation because we begin to see spikes and changes in behaviors starting in 2011, which was the advent of the iPhone. And we'll talk about that just a little bit in just a bit. But teenagers are spending nearly 9 hours a day absorbing social media. 9 hours a day. They check their phone on average 80 times a day. So they are living in a world that is always on. Very few constraints. Their parents think that they're safe because they're home, but they are not looking at what's on their phones. They are not safe just because they're home. They no longer need help from intermediaries like librarians or teachers or ticket agents because you can do all of that now on your phone. So they're not connecting to adults. They're not asking adults questions. They're getting all their questions answered through Google, through YouTube, through social media. That's where all their information is coming from. So they're extremely self-directed. They're not going to ask you when they can pick up their phone and find it themselves. So that helps us understand where their information is coming from. And what it's leading to, unfortunately, is these brains full of information, way more information than I was taking in as a young adult, but no adults guiding them. So there's a lot of information and no wisdom, very little wisdom in what to do with all of this information. Violent images, sexual images, political turmoil. They don't know what to do with all that, but it's going into their brains. What's the third defining characteristic? They're multiracial. Since the early 1700s, the most common name in our country was Smith, which is me. But now the most common name is Rodriguez. Multiracial children are the largest group of youth in the United States, or the fastest growing, the fastest growing group of youth in the United States. In 2020 now, it's estimated that more than half of our kids are of minority or ethnic groups. Gen Z is the first generation for whom diversity is a natural concept. It is part of their world. They don't even talk about diversity. We're the ones talking about diversity because it concerns us. It doesn't concern them because they're living in it. Part of that is because on their phones, they have global connections. Do you know that when they have their headsets on and they're gaming, or even maybe listening to music, they can also be connected to people all over the world. When they're gaming, they're talking to people through their headsets all over the world. Different cultures, different worldviews, and they're just blending all of that together. And for them, that is very, very normal. Number 4, they're sexually fluid. It's during their lifetime that our Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. And this happened. Bruce Jenner, our very manly American athlete, Olympian, who won so many gold medals, decided to become a woman. And these last few years, Bruce became Caitlyn in public view of everyone. And our kids watched this happen, and the media praising this process for Bruce living his truth. That's the message that they are getting. So as a consequence, 73% favor same-sex marriage, 74% favor equal rights for transgender people. And for Generation Z, acceptance is now the same thing as affirmation. They don't want to just be tolerated. They want their choices to be affirmed. That they're awesome, no matter what they're doing. Everything about them is great. So let's look at what that sounds like. Kristen Stewart, who broke out as a celebrity in the Twilight vampire movies, says, I think in 3 or 4 years, there are going to be a whole lot more people who don't think it's necessary to figure out if you're gay or straight. It's like, just do your thing. Or Miley Cyrus, I don't relate to being boy or girl, and I don't have to have my partner relate to boy or girl. So is it any wonder that about 50% of young people don't think they're exclusively heterosexual? They're open to the idea that they might be something else. They might have other kinds of relationships. They might be attracted to other kinds of people than heterosexual relationships. They believe that labels are repressive. They don't want to be called anything. And so James Emery White says sexuality should be set free from any and all restrictions, and people should be allowed to follow their desires moment by moment. Whatever I feel like doing, I'm going to do, and that's okay. And I expect you to affirm that, because that's who I am. I'm doing me, and I'm living my truth. So their greatest value is individual freedom, not collective anymore. No concern for what everyone else is doing as far as responsibility to others or patterning my life after others. It's really just doing what I want to do. Individual freedom. So how, friends, is that going to affect pregnancy work? When we do have a standard of what's right and what's wrong and what's harmful and what's helpful and what's going to be good for these young women and what's going to be bad for them, we believe those things. They don't necessarily, because they're going to do whatever they want to do, and it's just fine. So number 5, they are post-Christian. This is the first American generation raised in a post-Christian context, meaning a lot of them didn't have parents that took them to church, no religious upbringing, and so they're completely secularized. In 2016, one of 3 18 to 24-year-olds said that they didn't even believe in God. So they're absolutely atheists, that group. They distrust religion because they think it promotes anti-gay attitudes. And they want religion to be more positive and less negative so that everyone is accepted. This 23-year-old girl said, nobody wants to associate with something that tells people their sexual preference is sin. God loves all. God just wants you to be nice. That's their view of God and religion. So aren't we surprised that teens are experiencing the worst mental health crisis in recent history, in decades? We are seeing loneliness, depressive symptoms, major depressive episodes, anxiety, cutting, self-harm, and suicide. They're all on the rise since 2011, since they started carrying around smartphones. These things have taken hold inside of them. They're comparing themselves to others on social media constantly. They're experiencing the fear of being left out. It's called FOMO, fear of missing out. And that's a thing that they talk about, that so-and-so is having a party and I wasn't invited. So-and-so went shopping. So-and-so bought this or went on a vacation. They can see all of those things on social media and they're comparing and they're always coming up short. They're scared to death of imperfections, which is why they filter all their pictures and take 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 selfies before they'll find one that's decent enough to actually post on social media. Their world is full of confusion and sexual confusion. They have no idea what they're supposed to be doing with their bodies. No one is helping them. They're being thrown out into the wolves and saying, figure it out. Whatever you want to do is fine. So they don't even know what they're supposed to be doing sexually. So we shouldn't be surprised that they're full of anxiety and fear because their world has just turned upside down. They don't know what we would call a normal growing up experience is. So how do we reach them? What do we do about this? We want to reach them. God is bringing them into our centers because they are pregnancy age. So what are we going to do? Well, first of all, some basic things. Use the proper channels, not Facebook. If you're trying to get clients, they're not on Facebook. Your donors might be, but not your clients. Your clients are on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Snapchat. Now remember, they're 9 hours a day on the phone. So let's look at that rather than as a negative when we're talking about clients. Let's look at that as an opportunity to communicate with them and to advertise to them and to reach them on their social media platforms. How can you do that? How can you leverage Instagram to get clients into your center? Use the proper channels. Number 2, be creative in how you present your services. You know, millennials wanted experiences. They wanted to backpack through Europe. Whereas Gen Z, they want to get out of school with no debt and get a job. They're much more practical. They want a great product. Rather than an experience, they want a product that's going to work for them and solve their problems. Experiences produce anxiety. Products, not typically. They can pick what they want and get what they want. So how can you provide your product, your pregnancy tests or your ultrasounds or your parenting classes or your post-abortion programs? How can you present those things in ways that are going to appeal to them and make them feel safe and not threatened and affirmed for who they are? Some ideas that we've been kicking around is we can't get on our campuses this year with COVID. So we were thinking for our colleges, we would do gift baskets, big gift baskets with some fun stuff and some notes, personal little notes in there, and take them over to the sororities. What about drive-by dinners? We were having our clients in on Friday nights for dinner, but we can't do that right now with COVID. So we're having them drive by and giving them pizza and a soda or a little box dinner. And that way we're still staying connected with them. We're saying, hey, we care about you guys. And we're giving them a small baby gift or a gift card or a little something along with their meal to keep that connection. I would encourage you to reevaluate your center's appeal factor. Is your center decorated for 40-year-old and 50-year-old women? Or is it decorated for 20-year-old women? Who is your center for? For you or for them? We got to be creative, friends, in how we approach them. Number 3, use an edgy campaign. Traditional marketing doesn't work. It just doesn't work anymore. We have to embrace the technology that they are using and think of new ways to tell stories. They love stories, but they have to be very short and they have to be light. They don't want anything that's going to upset them. So you want to share stories on Instagram about your dog, about your pets, about a center mascot that you share stories about, doing different things. Your little dog can be your mascot and share stories. You've got to come up with ways to connect with them on the platforms that they are on and edgy things. When you go in to do your client visits, are you taking an iPad and showing videos rather than explaining everything verbally and using print materials? How about showing abortion videos or STD videos on an iPad and having a conversation with them around technology? Use things that will connect with them, not that make us comfortable. Number 4, ask questions. Remember, Gen Z has lots of information in their head. Ask them questions. They're so technologically savvy. They are digital students. They can show you things on your iPhone you have no idea are even there. So engage with them that way. Gain their trust by asking questions about What do they like on social media? What apps do they use? How do they shop on social media? What games are they playing? We have a 13-year-old couple at our center. They're pregnant, boy and a girl. And I mean, they're both coming. They're both 13. And our volunteer that's working with them through parenting was having a hard time getting that boy to open up and say much. And so she started asking him about his video games. And he came alive and started talking about the games he was playing and how they work. And she probably isn't tremendously interested in that, but he is. And so she listened and she affirmed that he's smart and he's capable, and just loved him in that moment. So another idea about asking questions: form a focus group of Generation Z kids. Ask 5, 6 of them that you know, maybe kids in your youth group, but you don't want them all to be church kids, maybe some friends of your kids. Form a focus group and ask them questions about your center, about the way you all treat your clients, about the way you dress. Is that appealing to a 20-year-old? Do you look like a church lady that's buttoned up and no fun? Or are they going to walk in and see someone that they're going to be able to relax with and relate to? Ask them. They'll tell you. Number 4, be authentic. Care about them. Really care about them. This seems so cheesy and simple, but it's true. If we aren't doing what we do because we love our clients, then we don't need to be doing it. We need to go into that room saying, Lord, I'm going to love this girl or this young man, no matter what. And we don't walk in with any other agenda. Then how do I help you? How can I serve you today? And love them genuinely. That heart motivation has to be pure before the Lord. And that would be a great volunteer training to see, really, have your volunteers kind of drifted away from that and they're just going through the motions. Did they complain about your clients? Or did they love them, sincerely love them? With fear being a huge problem for our Generation Z, we can give them a safe place where the real us loves the real them. And with that kind of an environment, they will respond to us, most of them, and will attract their loyalty, and maybe even some of them will come to Christ because they are loved. The last way to reach them is don't make any assumptions. This generation is different. They're different. So we need to get to know them. We can't assume that they are going to respect us because we're adults, or that they have any religious views, that they know how to communicate, have a conversation, have a relationship. We can't assume that they value getting married or having children, because it's likely that none of those things are true. So we cannot put our history and our filters on Generation Z because they don't have them. But I do want to caution all of us not to think of them as zoo animals or some kind of science experiment or something to be researched. No, these are precious, precious people that God has created. And He's placed on this planet at this time in this crazy world for a reason. We want to know what that is and how to help them. They're full of potential. They're full of information. They're technologically savvy. Let's tap into that, respect them for it, and look for ways to connect with them. They've grown up surrounded by, what are those 4 words? Chaos, uncertainty, volatility, and complexity. It is way too much for their age. So you be the safe place where they find peace, where something makes sense, but mostly where they experience Jesus. This is what we want to do for Generation Z. We want to love them. Love them relentlessly. And God will do amazing things. Thank you for sharing this session with me. I hope you'll tune in on the 20th from 9 to 1, where presenters will be there doing live Q&As. So if you have any questions about this presentation or any comments you want to make, tune in on the 20th, and I will look forward to seeing you there. Thanks so much.